the Eagles are the better team, and the Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl. Welcome back to another episode of Eagles Edge, and I'm joined with special guest Cody Alexander. Earlier this offseason, I had an opportunity to appear on his podcast, so if you have a chance, I'll link that in the show notes, so go check that out. Really great content. And, Cody's someone who kind of got me interested in creating my own content when I started, like, a year and a half, 2 years ago, just kind of being inspired by his story, how he got into it from being a coach and then getting into the content side. I was like, I might as well give this a shot. I've learned so much just about defensive mechanics and everything he's put out. So I just wanted to bring him on and kind of share his knowledge with all of you guys. So how you doing today, Cody?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely. So, as people know with my interviews, I don't do much small talk. I like to just get into it. Now, generally, we do send the questions ahead, but I know Cody's so well versed in this stuff. I kind of want to just spring it on him and get his candid thoughts and just, as we always do, ask questions that I'm curious about. So, Cody, your whole shtick is match quarters. And really, what I want to ask you is, and this is pertains especially to the Eagles and Fangio. Is there something magical about the quarters defense?
Look, I've fallen in love with it. I know that there's certain people that don't want to teach quarters because it's so teaching intensive. I think that's what really drew me to it to begin with, is just the way that it can layer. And because it is technically a split field coverage, you can do certain things to the tags and building the pattern matching and the different leverages and techniques that you can have it. Anybody that's actually lived in a quarter system knows it's like a living, breathing thing. It can change year to year. What you did and what you based in one year could be completely different. There's so many different ways that you can tweak it, that you can kind of retool it or create tags for within it, because you're really building a box at the end of the day, or you're building kind of like a triangle, different triangles, especially if you play palms. I know a lot of people consider palms part of the quarters universe. So to me, that's what I really love about it, is just the fact that it kind of is like water, that it can mold and shift and form into whatever you need it to, depending on what the offense has given you.
Yeah, and candidly, I think a lot of recreational fans' idea of coverages maybe stems from what they see on Madden, like those diagrams, and you go, it's just four guys dropping deep. And could you just add a little bit of context behind that about, like, yeah, there is spot drop or country coverage, but that's just the tip of the iceberg and there's so much more underneath.
Yeah. So what you were talking about with country coverage is essentially like what you saw in Madden like 10 years ago. Like there's a zone, the guy goes to it. If there's a receiver in there, or, it's a vision break system at that point, right? Where I'm getting to my spot, I'm looking at the quarterback, I'm kind of IDing if there's a receiver close by, and then I'm breaking on the ball when it's thrown. That's the whole reason why Saban and Belichick invented Rip Liz match, which is their match cover 3, was because they were like, Dan Marino will just throw it in to this spot every single time. And I thought a couple, like, what was this? When the Rams were on Hard Knocks, I'll never forget Jalen Ramsey telling one of the young DBs, if you're watching the quarterback, you're watching completions. And so, like, over time, country coverage has kind of faded out. And so then you have different elements, like different shades of gray, basically, of zone match, where I'm matching the stem of the receiver, but then I'm going to zone off at some point. That if it goes vertical, then the DBs, you have to think about quarters, you have 4 DBs on top of everybody. If we get 4 verticals, eventually it will become man coverage for them. Then you have man match, which is essentially true split field coverage. Literally draw a line through the middle of the field. Whatever happens on one side, it doesn't matter. If that guy runs all the way across the field, that guy, if I'm matched with him and I'm locked on him, I will go all the way. That's why the cover 7 system for Saban, which is man match quarters, that system has struggled at times versus running quarterbacks, because what kills 2-man? Running quarterbacks. Why do we not see 2-man in the NFL anymore? Running quarterbacks. Look, and I'm sure Carl Scott somewhere is giving me his laser eyes because it's not 2-man. But at the end of the day, when everything's matched out, it turns into that. So there's different shades where coaches live on. Some are real zone heavy. They kind of, want to match routes, but we still want to have eyes on the quarterback. And then others are like, no, man, we're locking in, like the Pat Narduzzi's of the world, where it's 4 lock, everybody's locked in, and then the 3 underneath guys are the ones that are playing with vision.
Yeah. And I think it's so funny because there was a time in the NFL where teams were playing like tons of country cover 3, which is like the Madden diagram. And I would ask you, like, when we saw Eli Manning's of the world throwing for 5,000 yards, do you think a little bit was it because there's like, there you go, another cover 3, boop, and then I'm throwing it down the seam, or any other cover 3 beater? Is that a fair characterization?
Oh yeah, because once you go to spot drop and you then understand, like, receivers know where to sit down and look, the West Coast offense essentially created a lot of what the basis for all these option routes within the intermediate, and so they knew exactly where the spots were, and they had conversions. If we have hey, look, if you're getting, it's man coverage, then you just keep going. If it's not man coverage, hey, this is where the hole is. And so I think, over time, started really feeling like, and again, remember, match cover 3 has been around since the 90s, and it's just people run what they know. It's no different than anything. Like, we all have anchor biases. We all are kind of anchored to a certain way. Like, I'm a quarters guy, and so I love quarters. But then I talk to people that are like, I would never run quarters. And that's fine. That's because we all have, that's the beauty about defensive football. It's like there's a million different ways to get to the same result. But at the end of the day, like, we're all trying to figure out the same problem. Right. So you have to, if you run cover 3, you have to have quarters tools. If I run quarters, I have to be able to close the post. So I have to have cover 3 tools. So it's like we all get to the same place. It's just how we start there.
Yeah, and Fangio, he gets the bill as the quarters guy. But then if you look at the coverage distribution, which I've recently posted on Twitter, a diagram with all the teams and their coverage distributions, and take it with a grain of salt. Those are from charting services, and the way they match routes could maybe cause some issues in labeling a certain coverage. But I think it's fair to say he played more 3 high, so whether it's cover 9 or cover 3, than he played cover 4. So even amongst people who play the most cover 4, like, they're still playing a lot of single high.
Yeah.
I'm just calling 3 high and a euphemism for cover 3.
Yeah, look, cover 3 is the king coverage. Like, that's what everybody in the NFL runs. And I don't see, there are less teams that run, about a third of the NFL will run about 50-50, but you don't have like an overwhelming, where the Vikings last year were kind of an anomaly. Cardinals last year, not in 2024, but 2023, the Cardinals and the Vikings were kind of an anomaly where they ran almost everything from some sort of a quarters or a cover 2 shell. You just don't necessarily see that at the NFL level because of the run game and because of the way they play in bigger formations. This isn't college where it's basically the NCAA offense of 11 personnel, Y off. Well, everybody runs that. So you do see that. And 2, Fangio is not a quarters. He just isn't. He runs really his version of cover 6, which is quarter, quarter, half. He also has 8, which is flipping that cover 2 side to the nickel, which is primarily what he runs, because he's really a weak rotation cover 3 defensive coach, which means that the safety opposite the nickel is typically the one that's going to drop. And so the whole thing since 2020 was, we're going to play everything from a 2 high shell, and everything will look the exact same post snap, because you have to understand what the quarterback is trying to do. The quarterback is trying to look at the safeties for the coverage ID. He's not looking at the corners. And I've talked about this with quarterbacks before. It's like, really, you have to get your eyes to the corner. And most of them will be like, well, I can't do that. And it's like, exactly. Like, that's why the Fangio system works. But people that don't understand defensive structure will see a 2 high shell, will see a 4 across shell, and we'll just assume, oh, well, that's cover 4 or that's cover 2, when in fact, a third of all plays in the NFL last year had some sort of a disguise in it. So what you're seeing, and that sounds like a low number, but that's actually relatively high. It's about the same as the blitz rate within the NFL. So I think teams are starting to use that almost in the same sense that they use blitzes. And Fangio started that in 2020.
Yeah, and I believe Fangio's disguise rate was like over 50%. It was first or second in the league. And what you said made me really think of something where it's like, okay, if we think the corner is a more reliable indicator of coverage with all the post snap rotations and the safeties lying to you, do you think that's one impetus or advantage of having these ultra condensed sets like you'll see with the Lions, where now that guy is right in the peripheral vision of the QB and he doesn't have to like scan all the way to the sidelines to see him? Or they're not really taking advantage of that?
I think it's about a 50-50. Like, yeah, you can see him there. But the condensed sets, if you're going to play too high, makes it really hard for that safety to defend the run. It forces the corner to be in that. It's the old Alex Gibbs saying of like the corners can't tackle at every level of football. That's why we don't block them. And, in some of these, the top two plays in the NFL, duo and wide zone, which duo, if you don't know what duo is a downhill run. It's basically power without a pole. And then wide zone is kind of the Shanahan McVay base that everything, we aim for the outside and then we want the cutback and then all the boot action, all that. Well, they don't block the corner in neither one of those. It's kind of 50-50 in terms of that. But no, the condensed sets really kind of are more of a force on communication. The motioning pre-snap hits a lot quicker. It forces kind of defenses to show their cards a little bit more.
Yeah. And one of the things I'll tell Eagles fans or anyone else who's interested is that I believe when you start in a too high shell, it's easier to adjust to motion. Do you agree with that? And if so, why?
Yeah, it's easier to play down than it is to play back. Once you're back, you're hooked. It's really hard to just turn and burn and get back, especially against play action on early downs. So all the defense is really doing is allowing the safety to collect more data on what the play is, especially as we get more under center play action. Look, I don't think under center play action is going anywhere. So I don't think the boot action is going anywhere. So all of these things that kind of Shanahan and McVay have introduced into the league. I mean, even look at the Andy Reid of everything has some sort of a short motion. Everything's a cluster or a bunch. Clusters is two receivers stacked together. A bunch is three. Quad sets, meaning that we have four guys on one side. They could be wide. They could be tight. We have different leverage points, but we're going to have some sort of a motion. I mean, Mike McDaniel in Miami has a whole play call sheet of just double motions. So it's like such a part of the game now that I think too high really allows you, whether you're playing cover 3 or you're playing quarters or you're playing cover 2, that you have more of a data collection ability where I'm playing from depth. But the impetus to this is also that, you're going to give up a little bit in the run. And this is where I think analytics has changed the way football has. 10 years ago, we had defensive coaches saying, with, their win rate boards of like, we want to have less than, 75 yards rushing. We want to have 17 points a game. We want to have this. And like, you can't do those anymore. I'll never forget. I mean, it was literally less than 10 years ago where we were having real conversations in meeting rooms of like, hey, do we even have a defensive board of like a goal board? I think the goal should just be like, hey, let's win. Because that's where I cut my teeth in coaching was at Baylor under Art Briles. I mean, we're scoring 70 points a game. Like that's triggering for defensive coaches. And then you start realizing like my offense is going to play 100 plays a game. We're probably going to play 90 to 100 plays a game. Is it realistic to have these antiquated goals? And so I think like that where analytics has come in is that we know that running is less efficient than passing. So if you want to run the ball down the field, then and we can keep you to 3-4 yards a pop, you're going to eventually try and throw the ball. And most offenses today will not hand the ball off on a 20 play 3-yard gain on an attempt run. This isn't Navy or Air Force or Army.
Yeah. And you kind of got my wheels turning there because recently I've started to have this fascination with run pass tendencies. And I recently just put out a little study on Twitter, kind of looking at what play callers did compared to league baselines in a variety of situations. And there is a big dichotomy between guys who just pass, and other teams now tending towards run. And of course, it's highly personnel based. Like if you have Joe Burrow with a bad offensive line and a mid running back, and you've got all-star receivers, it makes sense to be like 70% pass. And opposite with the Eagles, like you have a great defense and you want to win the possession game and you got this all-time run game. Well, of course you're going to skew towards running. But one of the quotes that really was interesting to me is that Zach Bond said in this offseason after the Super Bowl that it was amazing in the second half of the season that it felt like every single time the offense ran, we were in a coverage where we were rotating a safety down, almost like he was clairvoyant and he knew what the offense was going to do. And Fangio sometimes alludes to the fact that he's got his own analytics that he doesn't tell anyone on his staff. And I wonder, first off, I'd ask you to speculate. Do you think it's related to tendencies? Of course, he's got probably a bunch of analytics, but do you think that's a big one? And two, like, how do you, as a play caller, anticipate what the offense is going to do? Is that just pure studying? Is that him being 40 years in the league and having amazing intuition? And can you gain a big advantage if you can take that too high shell, gain all the advantage of that, but when they're going to run, now you mitigate that weakness by calling a coverage where you rotate an extra guy into the box?
Yeah, first, the NFL is actually a heavy tendency. I mean, you kind of have an idea, and most defensive coordinators will tell you, like, they pretty much know what's coming run pass wise. There's very few coordinators that are good enough to where they just mix everything up. I'm sure you saw that in your tendency chart, so that you were looking at, it's like some of these tendencies, like you said, are like 70%. Like, oh man, okay, like everybody knows what's going. I think it's just a matchup of the NFL. But I will say this: I think the use of technology has accelerated guys in my generation. Like I'm going to turn 40 in January. So guys that are around my age, 45 to 35, there's been kind of this kind of explosion of young DCs. And I think a lot of it has to do with the technology. Whereas a guy like Fangio, it took him a little while to get established because you have to go through the reps defensively. It's a reaction based side of the field. So we have to do everything off of what the offense is giving us. And I think Fangio has devised also a defense that has tools built in it. I mean, I think when I first started studying this, I'm a quarters guy, but when I started tinkering around with the Fangio system, man, it was just like, yeah, this makes sense. Everything looks, I mean, it's exactly what I've preached since 2016. Make everything look the exact same pre-snap, have tools and adjustments to sets and formations. So you're not just running blanket umbrella coverages. All of that stuff in the Fangio system, they have tools built into every single thing that it doesn't matter what formation they come out. And it doesn't matter where they put Travis Kelce, whether, to go to the Super Bowl, whether he's one weak side, he's 3 or 2 to the strong side. They have an answer and a built-in kind of toolbox for that. And that takes time to develop. And so, yeah, I think with Fangio, it's a little bit of probably gamesmanship of him saying, he has his own analytics and he has his own analytics is the fact that he's been one of the top defensive coordinators for like 20 years. And he's one of the he's going to go down as one of the guys that kind of like Spagnuolo with the Chiefs, that is just kind of like revolutionized the way that defenses have played within the last decade, especially in this era of football, this kind of post-spread era that we have here in the NFL. And so then on the other part of it is when that, it's just building the toolbox, which he has a massive, that's the one thing I think where Fangio relates back to a guy like Saban is that it's coverage based first, and then everything fits off of it going forward. And so it's like, this is the coverage. So we're really teaching intensive on the back end. And then the fronts are kind of simple, but it's just leveraging tools, right? Where's the bubble? Where do we put our guy? And then getting the matchup we want up front. And then the coverage, though, is always going to have more tools in the toolbox to stop what that formation is by the offense.
Yeah, and you need the guys, right? Because there's been years where that 6-man box, maybe they only had like one good player in there, and then his defenses were getting destroyed in the ground game. But when you have a Jordan Davis, you have a Jalen Carter to keep the Zach Bonds and the Kobe Deans free to just run through holes. scrape to the sidelines, it works out. I agree with you. I've heard some people say it's back to front. I don't really agree with that. I think it is very coverage based, and then it's like you just need the personnel up front, and there's not a lot of crazy stuff going on. One interesting thing is Ollie Conley, who's a fantastic writer. Read Optional is a blog he has. He's talked about how Rex Ryan kind of has a big influence on a lot of these DCs in the NFL today. And you mentioned it, how by its nature, defense is a reaction. And they've tried to tip that scale a little bit the other way, where it's like, let's make the offense react to us the way we put these 7 men on the line of scrimmage, and we have bluff blitzers and sim and creeper pressures, and we have kind of crazy rotations in the back end, getting to non-traditional Tampa looks. And my question is, Fangio doesn't do that. Like, yeah, he'll infrequently throw in like some kind of creeper pressure, drop an edge or whatever, and then he's got the safety rotation, but it's nothing that's unexpected. It's not like all of a sudden he has a guy running across the field. Like it's always the same mechanics. And my question is, how was he able to be successful even though he didn't really seem to be dictating to the offense? Is it just the pure execution and personnel that allowed them to be successful, or something else?
Well, let's first start with the Rex Ryan comment. Rex Ryan essentially took his father's blitz package from the 46 Bear defense, and kind of the Buddy Ryan system that really kind of took over the NFL for a while. And what he created was what's called BTFs, which are blitz the formations. And so whatever the formation, I have a call, I call it, and whatever the offense comes in, we have a check within that blitz to change the blitz depending on the formation. And so instead of being coverage intensive, it's very much front intensive and check intensive. And so everybody has to be able to communicate within the blitz package. Well, we've kind of advanced a little further. Offenses kind of figured out, well, okay, the back is now predicated for a lot of it. The tight end is now predicated. So like you can kind of go that blitzing right now against a lot of these quarterbacks. They already know where their release is coming. They already know where to throw the ball. They know where the voids are. And so I think what a guy like Fangio and some of these other defensive coordinators started doing was like, well, what if we, combine the blitz, the formation, and actually have like formation checks? And like, I'll never forget, this is probably 2018. I started hearing about like Greg Williams was talking about defensive formations. So you start seeing like, well, and I really think 2018 will go down as an epoch change for the NFL. Like the NFL in 2018 changed forever. I think the Eagles, going back to the Eagles Super Bowl in 2017, essentially ushered us into kind of where we are today with football. You go back to 2018, that's Mahomes, that's Goff, that's McVay starts coming in. Remember, Shanahan and McVay both get head coaching jobs in 2017. Offensive explosion in 2018. It took them about a year to figure out, get their legs underneath of them. So I think you go back to things like that. 2020, we have everything playing from a too high shell. We go even further with Fangio and just saying like, look, there's a coverage check on the formation. And really what he's trying to do is create backstops. So wherever your guy is, if I'm playing Miami and I've got Tyreek Hill, I'm playing the Chiefs and they've got Travis Kelce. I mean, the beautiful thing about the Super Bowl was that there was literally 3 guys, 4, sometimes 5 guys around Travis Kelce. They couldn't get him the ball until the second half when the Eagles were already up by like 40 points. And they just were like playing, hey, just, base, give the old one or give the old fist and just play base. So to me, even within the base, though, there's coverage checks and there's backstops. What he's trying to do, and I think what he does a really good job of, is instead of creating issues up front, he relies on the matchups, the front to win. And like you mentioned that before, of like there's certain years where, the first time when they lost to the Chiefs to the Super Bowl, it was, hey, they can't stop the run all year, right? Just they didn't have the horses up front, but coverage wise, they were great. When Gannon was there, and Gannon leaned in a little bit too much on cover one by the end of the year. And so I think, to me, looking at that, he wants that BTF, more or less coverage the formation of like, hey, we want this. We have answers for this. When you look at his coverage structures, a lot of them are based on, hey, we can give a Zeus tag and basically tag wherever that best receiver is. We have a coverage check built in for that so that we always have a zone double and we're not constantly like Jim Schwartz just in man coverage all the time and just hoping that my corners can survive the season playing a bunch of track meets.
Yeah, and last year, like Quinyon Mitchell and Darius Slay on the outside, that's such a luxury for Fangio because that unlocks all of these tools where if you want to have the weak safety cross key, the number 3, you can leave your corner on an island and recruit that extra resource. But now this year, they don't have that. They've got Keely Ringo, Jacorian Bennett, and Adoree Jackson fighting for that number 2 spot. No matter who wins the job, they won't be as good as Darius Slay. And my question is, if put yourself in Fangio's shoes, what are you doing? Are you sticking with that and just hoping for the best? Are you gonna play more cover 2 to the weaker corner side? Are you gonna have Quinyon Mitchell travel and shadow the best receiver more often, and maybe they just motion away anyway? What do you think are the best approaches given that weakness?
Well, this system already, like, go look at Evero with the Panthers. He has Horn as a boundary corner. You go and look at AJ Terrell and the Falcons. They use him as a boundary corner. So I think Mitchell ends up becoming the boundary corner. What does boundary mean in the NFL? Because you play in the middle of the field, it just means away from the nickel. So wherever the nickel goes, he's going to go opposite, just so that they always have a boundary. If the ball's on the hash, he's going to go to the quote unquote short side of the field, just because offenses, even at the NFL level, are still built on short side, wide side. So I think that's probably the best one. I think Ringo ends up winning it. I think he can play. I think he's also one that he could play the boundary if needed. He's kind of a sticky corner. He's kind of that bulldog that you want. He is a bulldog. He's a Georgia Bulldog, like half the defense. But in essence, like, he can play that press in your face. If I need to go opposite, like if I need to take that safety, he can do that. So he's kind of that guy. But I think that's where we see a little bit more, probably a little bit more quarters, probably why they went to a little bit more quarters, just because the personnel that they have. If you play quarters and you have outside corners that can play man, because that's essentially what they're going to end up playing most of the time anyway, then I think you're in good shape, because it allows you to do all of that puzzle work in the middle of the field, essentially pack the middle of the field, which I go back to the Super Bowl. It was a masterclass. Everybody wants to focus on the D line, and rightfully so. But that was more of a story of the Chiefs O line than it was the Eagles D line. It really was meant Mahomes had nowhere to go with the ball in the middle of the field. And I think that, to me, comes from, and that kind of shift to more of a quarters system is because you have guys outside that we feel can stack receivers and at least stay on top of them.
Yeah, and Ringo, he has such specific strengths and weaknesses. He's got great long speed. He's pretty physical for a corner, and he's got really tight hips and has trouble changing direction. Are there coverage mechanisms or, leverage, or how far off they would play? Like, what would you do to try to mask those weaknesses to some degree?
Well, I think you press him. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I think you press him because you force that receiver to show what he's going to do right at the ball. Don't let him sit back and get his hips in the wrong direction, or he's got to think and process to make sure that my hips are correct. He's got great long speed. Let him go run a little bit. So that's where I think it'll be interesting when the season starts, is where I think Ringo's going to end up winning that number 2 spot. I'm just interested on where they're going to play him. Do they just keep him into the boundary because that's just kind of the guy? He's kind of a boundary corner, and Mitchell's really the guy that can kind of be that sleigh and play to the field and do a bunch of different techniques, because that's what he did in college. Luckily, I knew his DB coach at Toledo. He's now at Coach Parker. He's now at Illinois, and that was one of the things, the big quarters team. So they don't run a lot of coverages. So how do you kind of hide your intentions? Well, you play a bunch of different techniques depending on formation. So he came from that system. He's used to playing zone. He's used to playing a match zone. So I think Mitchell may be that kind of Swiss Army knife corner guy, but leave Ringo into the boundary.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like we saw in the preseason, Fangio clearly put him in the toughest position possible just to see how he'll fare. Like, throw him into the fire. And he said as much in his interview. He has him playing 10 yards off Jamar Chase and then trying to get desperately to the sideline, and he's pivoting back inside. And people are saying, this guy can't play. And I go, like, no, that was probably, if you could draw up the worst possible situation between the actual player and the type of play he has to defend, it would be this. And I'd rather that happen now than in the actual regular season. So I don't think Fangio would play that coverage in an actual regular season game. One thing I think is interesting, talking about how far they play off. Last year they came out and they were playing like 8 to 10 yards off, and they were not doing that good. Darius Slay was getting roasted. Quinyon Mitchell took his lumps earlier in the season. And then they started to play tighter. They started to kind of play 6 yards off, and then they were kind of matching a little bit more aggressively. What is kind of the trade-offs in playing up? Why did he start back in the first place? Was it not obvious that playing a little bit more up was going to be better? What do you think kind of went through that process?
Well, I think it just starts with, we don't want to give up any explosives. We know we have a really good defensive line, so let's just stay on top of everything. We'll rally to it. Sometimes guys, the deeper that you get, just don't. There's too much. There's too much eye candy. There's too much going on. I think when you tighten them up, especially like if you have guys like Mitchell, I think with Ringo, I think like you have guys like that where they're more mannish in the way that they play. Let them be a little bit tighter. You don't have to press. I think that it's very rare that a guy is able to press at like 50% over. I know a lot of people talk about McDuffie and the Chiefs with their press percentages, but they also play a ton of cover too. So, and really, if you go back and you watch the film, they don't press unless they have a safety on top of them. So to me, I think he needed to learn what those guys could do, what they were comfortable with. And then once he did it, kudos to him to pivoting. I mean, but we've also seen what a Fangio defense looks like with no pass rush and playing guys at 10 yards that look like the Vikings in 2022. So we don't want to, at Donatel, we don't want to do that.
When you turn on film of today's game, which offensive trend would worry you most as a defensive coach? And I guess it can be within or without the quarter system. And how do you start building a plan to handle that? Is there anything that jumps out to you?
Yeah, I think marrying gap schemes like what McVay's doing right now, marrying gap schemes, which is a polar. You have runs with polars, downhill polars with motion and things like that. Because the gap scheme is they're changing the math post snap on you in the box, but then they're also using quick motions and shifts to kind of create that leverage that they want to then reverse it post snap. So I think that one, the double motion stuff, to get you out of your coverage structure, because they want to see the first motion is going to get you out of your coverage structure because it's going to be quick. And then the second motion, they already know what you got. So now the quarterback has an idea of what to play. That to me, I think too, just anytime you introduce quarterback run game into anything, it changes the math for every defense. It doesn't matter single high, too high. It doesn't matter. Too high fits it up a little bit better. But quarters in the NFL is different than corners at the college level. And so I think that that's also important to understand, is that it's not 9-man spacing, meaning we don't have 9 in the box to stop the run. That's a college and high school thing. They're not doing that at the NFL. Those safeties are playing in pass first in quarters.
If you could give every NFL DC one core principle to improve their pass defense overnight, what would it be?
Use your leverage. Don't run, create leverage in all of your coverages. Static basic coverages just are not going to work. And you're going to have to create. And what I mean by that is you may have to have a match side and a zone side. We've seen that in cover 3. You have to be able to build backstops. We saw that in the Fangio system where he runs 8 and 6. So I think, and that's what I think a lot of offensive guys have really, or defensive guys have really started to come to realize. I thought it was really interesting. The Bengals, for instance, have been really trying to run some 5-man pressures with quarters the past couple of years. Anarumo's really been interested in it. Well, what does he do now that he's with the Colts? What's the first thing he did? They signed Bynum from the Vikings. Well, who runs the most quarters 5-man pressures? The Vikings. So I think it's not like, and 2, it goes back to the quarters and building different mechanisms, quarters rules. There's a lot of interest in quarters, but you would be shocked the amount of the lack of knowledge on how quarter structures are actually supposed to work, just because it's not a coverage that you see ran primarily in the NFL. Fangio obviously has a jump on a lot of people because of the way that he structures his cover 6 is very similar and has tools already built in that it's like, oh, well, this is similar to this, or hey, you remember in this coverage we use that. So to me, for NFL DCs, it's you have to be multiple now, which means you have to start playing with leverage. And that means that you have to start kind of building these hybrid coverage systems.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest misconception fans have about defense in general?
That it's easy. It's not. It's hard. I mean, look, offense is easy. I think no, but I do think that most people have no idea about run fit structures or how the front actually dictates where the ball hits. And then probably it's twofold, that and then also coverage shells. They just think like single high means, close post coverage, cover 1, cover 3, and then 2 high just means cover 2. Most people don't even think about quarters. They just think about it as cover 2 because Tampa 2, right? And so I think they don't even understand just basic structures, but also too, the TV doesn't help with that at all. You can't see half the time, you can't see what the safeties are doing pre and post snap. They just focus in on the quarterback. So it's not that their fault. It's also not something that a lot of people are talking about on air. So if you're a fan and you want to really learn more about football, learn defense first and understand coverages, because we live in an era where quarterbacks are making $50-60 million. So don't think that people are going to just drop the pass, but also then too, like how that affects run structures and how people are lined up, your anchor points are lined up on the front line.
If you go back like 10 years, I don't even know what percentage nickel was used. So that this is 5 defensive backs on the field. And now it's the new base defense. Everyone is using this the most of any package. And my question is, in 5 or 10 years from now, which defensive adjustment that is rarely used now, or maybe doesn't even exist, do you think will become commonplace? I know that's a tough one, but I'm just curious to see if your mind goes any specific place.
I think on third downs, what the Rams did last year with their cheetah package, having 5 defensive linemen on with 6 DBs. And I think it comes hand in hand with kind of finding these hybrid players. I think a guy like Isaiah Simmons, if he enters the league now, I think people would have a better idea of how to play him. Kyle Hamilton was essentially what everybody wanted Isaiah Simmons to be. I know Simmons was a little bit bigger. But you have guys like a Jeremy Chin. You have guys like Duggar that are they're really struggling to be hybrid safeties. They're really box guys. I think if they enter the league now, they start out at nickel. They don't even go back to safety. The Emanwuri kid from South Carolina that went to Seattle. I thought that was a great pickup. Everybody's trying. Seattle tried to get a bunch of safeties last year, and it just didn't work out. The Kayvon Wallace kid didn't pan out. Raekwon Jenkins got hurt early, and then it just kind of was, they had Love and the Bryant kid, and that was like, okay, well, we tried, so let's go actually draft somebody. I think what the Chargers are doing with Derwin James, I think what the Ravens were going to do this year until the injury to their, Washington, I think, their safety, teams are starting to collect safeties. And so I don't necessarily think that it will be like one thing. I think the cheetah package is interesting. I think people will try and manufacture something like that. But again, it requires hybrid DBs that can play near the box. But I think big nickel and then regular nickel. Big nickel just means 3 safeties, and then regular nickel means 3 corners. I think you're building 2 rooms within a room. I think the nickel position becomes and we already saw this. We saw this actually this year. Petrie technically is a safety. He's not a safety. Kyler Morgan is technically a corner. He's not a corner. They're both nickels. They play nickel. They play
Jalen Thompson of the Cardinals.
right. Yes, and then even too, like a Buda Baker is a safety, but he's really not. He's really an overhang, and he's really a nickel that plays near the box. And so I think to me, I think that position, especially now that we've seen it getting paid. Kyler Gordon got paid, Petrie got paid, Jordan Lewis for the Jaguars at 30 years old got paid $30 million. That's a conversation for a different day. But you're seeing guys at that position get paid, meaning what that's signaling to you is that this is a position. I think what we saw too with the Panthers again are trying to get, Trayvon Moore, who played a bunch of down safety for the Raiders last year. He's going to the Panthers. I think the Panthers within the Fangio system are trying to do the same thing. Billy Bowman for the Falcons, staying in the same Fangio adjacent scheme of like a safety that plays nickel. He really is going to play nickel. I think he has an opportunity to start. So Brian Branch, I mean, I could go on and on and on about these hybrid guys, but I think to me, that's that position. It's not necessarily a package or something, but it's the way that they're utilized. We'll look back and be like, we're probably going to have to be like, yeah, but what kind of nickel are they playing? Because I do think more offenses are going 12 personnel and 21 personnel. And I think they're realizing 11 personnel, unless you're Sean McVay and you've got Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, who are both half fullback, half receiver. It's really hard to run everything through 11 personnel.
Yeah, the cheetah package is really interesting because it just makes pragmatic sense that you'd want a bunch of like pass rushers and then coverage guys. And I wonder if the counter to that is like, oh, now we run a bunch of tunnel screens because we get it behind the aggressive pass rush and then we can just destroy a bunch of DBs or just like run it on 3rd and 8 or something crazy.
That's probably, it's the latter.
Yeah.
Probably you're going to see more, the high school of like, in high school, you'll still see 3rd down runs. At college and NFL, you like, especially if it gets past like 3rd and 5, you really don't see any runs. So it's like, there's a point of no return. But I think like you go cheetah package and they feel like all these guys are just trying to jet the run. You're going to see a lot more, run and trap on, or, kind of a trap draw on these 3rd and longs. I think that would be the answer.
So you really got the wheels turning on this positionless stuff. And I think that's a buzzword that's been thrown around a lot. And as you mentioned, the safety nickel, that's a super, useful hybrid type player to have. But Fangio's starting to invent this new one, or maybe you probably know someone who used it in like the 80s. I'll be curious to hear about this. But like this linebacker who can come and play edge and do it effectively. Now they used Zach Bond in that role last year, and it was a tremendous success because they could just boom, add one, shift Nakobe Dean into the middle, and suddenly they have like this formidable run defense, even if they're in a nickel package. And now they've got 2 of them.
Yeah.
Jihad Campbell can do this as well. So I wonder, is like, man, it would be nice if I had 2 of these and I could just do it to either side and just be ultra flexible. Do you think that is like a new hybrid? How hard is it to even cross train a guy like that? And how useful is it to the DC?
Well, it's a newer thing. I think like it used to be like, Lawrence Taylor's probably the best example of like, a linebacker that turned into an edge rusher, right? Sorry. But I think to me, it is a newer thing. Like Frankie Louvu with the Commanders was all pro last year. Basically did the same thing Zach Bond did. I think Mac Wilson Sr. with the Cardinals did a lot of that. Xavier Collins is kind of that hybrid guy for the Cardinals as well. Now he's pretty much turned into an edge. Browning, who's also with the Cardinals, they've kind of collected because they've had to, these guys. But I do think what it does is it does exactly what the Shanahan McVay guys have done forever, which is we're going to present you with a package. You know exactly who's on the field, but we're going to run something different. I'm going to give you, Shanahan is notorious for giving you 21 personnel with a fullback and a running back and a tight end, but then we'll go empty and then I'll attack you downfield. Or where you have McVay, who's like, we have 11 personnel on the field, but we are going to run a 12 personnel run formation. Okay, well, defensively, how do you do that? Well, I'm going to put nickel on the field. So you think it's going to be a 4 down front, and then I walk Zach Bond down. Now you're in odd spacing, and now you have to completely change the way that you're doing that. And then also, too, I can blitz him, I can drop him. It creates movement within post snap, which always messes with kind of run blocking and pass protection. So I actually think that we even saw this too. Jihad Campbell wasn't the only one that came out this year. It's a guy that can play off ball, but also might be doing that. Staying in the division over Sean. I know he's hurt, and we probably won't get to see much of him this year. But don't think for a second. I've already heard out of camp in Dallas that they're already working. Essentially a walk formation where they walk that guy down. That was one of the game plans in both Packers games. The Eagles really wanted to use the nickel, walk Bond down, get into a 5-man front, and then run a bunch of stuff out of that. I actually think if we look at the way that the roster construction of the Eagles is, I think Nakobe Dean is probably out after this year. They're going, like you said, I think they're looking down the future and having Bond and Jihad Campbell being able to, I can move those guys wherever I want. We can get into a 5-man front and out of nickel however we please. I think that to me is more of a signal, because Dean is really good in the box and he's really good at blitzing. He's a Georgia linebacker. He's good at blitzing. If he has to fit the A gap, he's really good at that. Everything else, he's probably, he's a little bit of a liability in coverage. Doesn't play man to man really well on a running back, which is why Bond is so fantastic, because he can do all those things. So to me, looking at it, that's why they drafted him. It's just for that reason right there.
Yeah, and the one other thing, this is the last thing I'll hit you with, is they knew they're going to have this drop off at corner, and there's kind of two main mechanisms you can do to help them out. And we talked about it in this episode. You can have a safety play over top, and then that really alleviates some of the burden on that corner. So you can help Ringo. But if you want to still play some of this, trips checks where you're having the safety help out and kind of push coverage towards where the best receivers are or more receivers are, but you still want to be able to help Ringo. Now you have this extra option where before you had Nakobe Dean potentially having to carry a receiver 40 yards downfield, and we saw them give up a 70-yard touchdown to like Jaden Reed, and then they kind of got out of that after that. But Jihad Campbell, he might be able to do that. He might be able to carry a receiver 40 yards downfield. I mean, this guy is shot out of a cannon. Do you think that maybe they'll lean on some more like cover 3, cover 9 type stuff and let Campbell match some of these vertical routes?
Yeah, I do. And I'm also interested in Makuba or even like a Sidney Brown being able to play kind of a dime back and being able to kind of do some different things against some of these 11 personnel teams that you feel like, okay, we might be able to maybe adjust some things and then have Bond kind of just be whatever we want. But no, I think anymore NFL guys are starting to figure out what colleges figured out probably about, around 2020, 2014 is that, so basically 10 years ago is that your Mike linebacker has to be able to cover. And if not, if you don't have at least 7 guys that can cover, you're going to get that one guy's going to get found. And for the Eagles, it was Nakobe Dean.
Yeah. All right. I really appreciate it. One thing I know, being from Texas, I watched Overshown's run defense film, and I was like, oh my God, this guy is unbelievable. And then I put on the pass defense, and that was a totally different story. But I hope he gets healthy. Even being an Eagles fan, he's an interesting player to me. But I really appreciate you coming on. So much great knowledge you shared. We'll have to do this again sometime. And next week we have a mailbag episode. So if you guys have any questions, throw them down in the comments. This has been another episode of Eagles Edge.